2:37 a.m. inside the CIC of the USS Mason, deep in the Strait of Hormuz. An operator suddenly calls out, "Fast mover, bearing 095, high-speed contact from the Iranian coastline." For a moment, the radar picture shows a target racing out from shore. Then, without warning, it disappears. No visible impact, no sudden turn, no clear signature. It is simply gone. 7 seconds later, the room is washed in the red glow of the Aegis system. Hundreds of new contacts appear almost at once. Drones skim just above the water. IRGC fast craft surge through the darkness. Target lock alerts begin echoing across the ship. And in one of the narrowest maritime corridors in the Middle East, even 60 seconds can be enough to push the world toward a major crisis. The Strait of Hormuz is no longer just a shipping route. It has become a high-risk corridor, guarded by the IRGC's final defensive layer along Tehran's southern coastline. Cutting through the night are 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, USS Mason, USS Truxtun, and USS McFall. They are operating under a fragile ceasefire, one that now seems moments away from breaking apart. Then the IRGC Navy makes its move. A wave of low-flying Shahed series drones produced by HESA appears alongside Siraj-1 high-speed craft emerging from Iran's rugged coastal terrain. They come from multiple directions, using the cliffs and shoreline to complicate detection and hide their radar profile. The purpose is clear: overwhelm the U.S. formation, force the destroyers to use up their defensive interceptors early, and create confusion before the next phase begins. At 2:40 a.m., the Aegis combat systems on all 3 ships shift from standby to full defensive mode. Through cooperative engagement capability, the 3 destroyers become more than separate vessels. They function as one connected shield. If Mason's SPY-1D-V radar sees a drone on the horizon, Truxtun and McFall see it too. Any ship in the formation can respond instantly. In this narrow and unforgiving arena, the U.S. destroyers are not fighting as isolated ships. They are sharing sensor data in real time, building one combined picture of the entire battle space. No contact is meant to slip through. No defensive round is meant to be wasted. The trap has closed, but the IRGC has just stepped into a digital hunting ground it may not fully understand. At 2:42 a.m., the situation becomes even more dangerous. IRGC commanders begin a saturation maneuver, trying to flood the American radar picture with too many contacts at once. More Shahed drones drop to just 3 meters above the water, running in silent mode. Their active radar emissions are shut down, and they rely on pre-programmed GPS routes, making them harder to detect through standard electronic countermeasures. At the same time, Siraj-1 fast craft accelerate towards 60 knots, weaving in sharp, unpredictable patterns. Their movements create clutter across the destroyer's radar screens, turning the display into a storm of signals. Inside the USS Mason's CIC, the air feels tense and electric. Every operator is locked onto their screen. Every second matters. Then the captain makes the key tactical call. Hold the SM-6. Do not use the top-tier interceptors yet. Instead, Mason's crew brings up a layered defensive response. ESSM interceptors launch from the Mark 41 vertical launch system, forming a fast-moving shield that cuts through the low-flying drone wave before it can close the distance to the formation. These medium-range interceptors are built for exactly this kind of threat. Fast, low-altitude targets trying to slip through at the last possible moment. At the same time, USS Truxtun responds against the approaching Siraj-1 fast craft. The ship launches naval strike missiles, 5th-generation stealth cruise missiles developed by Kongsberg and Raytheon. Flying just above the waterline, they move toward the incoming boats before those craft can reach close range. By 2:44 a.m., the tension reaches its highest point. The IRGC Aerospace Force makes a critical mistake. To support the next wave of anti-ship cruise missiles, they activate a 3rd Cordad missile battery hidden on a nearby island. The instant its phased array radar begins transmitting, it gives away its position. For the U.S. Navy, that signal is all they need. An SM-6 is launched in anti-radiation mode. Moving at nearly Mach 3.5, it races toward the source of the radar transmission. The operators on the ground have almost no time to react, adjust frequencies, or shut the system down. Moments later, the 3rd Cordad radar array is disabled, leaving one of Iran's key guidance systems out of the fight. The message is unmistakable. In this battle space, every transmission has a price. At 2:45 a.m., the engagement expands beyond the surface of the sea. From a forward operating base in the United Arab Emirates, 2 Sikorsky-built MH-60R Seahawk helicopters lift into the night. Equipped with Lockheed Martin combat systems, they fly at extremely low altitude, staying beneath Iran's long-range detection coverage. Their role is clear. They are the eyes of the Aegis formation from above. The Seahawks activate their AN/APS-153V1 multimode radar, a system designed to detect small, fast-moving surface targets in difficult sea conditions. Against the waves, radar clutter, and coastal interference, the system begins separating real threats from background noise. That information does not stay with the pilots. Through Link 16, the data is sent directly to the destroyers, giving Mason, Truxtun, and McFall a sharper and more complete picture of the area. The IRGC's attempt to use the coastline as cover begins to lose its advantage. Using infrared targeting systems, the Seahawk crews lock on to the fast-moving boats. At 2:47 a.m., the helicopters begin a precise engagement. A GM-114, Hellfire missiles, and laser-guided APKWS rockets streak towards selected targets. One by one, the Siraj 1 boats are taken out of the formation with carefully guided hits, preventing them from closing in on the U.S. ships. But the IRGC is not finished. A second third-corded battery positioned deeper inland launches a Tear-2B surface-to-air missile toward the lead Seahawk. Inside the cockpit, warning alarms erupt. The pilot reacts instantly, pulling the helicopter into a sharp, evasive turn, while releasing a cloud of magnesium heat decoys. The incoming missile follows the false heat signatures, passes by the aircraft, and detonates away from the helicopter. The Seahawk survives, but the close call proves just how unforgiving the environment has become. Even with threats coming from the sea, the shoreline, and the air defense network inland, the helicopters hold their position. Their sensors remain active, their data keeps feeding the destroyers, and above the black water of the Strait of Hormuz, the Aegis shield continues tightening around the entire formation. Their sensors remained locked on, refusing to give up control of the airspace. From above the dark water, the Seahawks continued feeding targeting data to the destroyers, helping the fleet clear out the remaining Iranian naval units before they could regroup. At 2:50 a.m., the momentum briefly shifted. The IRGC activated one of its strongest asymmetric tools. From mobile platforms spread along the coastline, Iran brought the Cobra 58 electronic warfare system online. This was not ordinary signal interference. It was a coordinated electronic screen designed to flood the X-band and S-band frequencies used by U.S. sensors. Working alongside the remaining third cordad batteries, the Cobra 58 began creating a dense field of interference across the battle space. The effect was immediate. Over the radio, the lead Seahawk pilot reported a major sensor disruption. Just minutes earlier, the MH-60R's AN/APS-153V. One radar had been guiding precision fire across the water. Now, it was struggling to separate real contacts from a wall of digital noise. Inside that electronic haze, the IRGC saw its opening. A low observable one-way drone slipped through a blind sector created by the interference and pushed past the outer defensive layers of USS Truxtun. At the final moment, the ship's phalanx CYWS engaged and stopped it short, but the impact still sent high-speed fragments across the upper structure. The shock damaged the SPQ-9B auxiliary radar antenna and temporarily forced it offline. At 2:52 a.m., pressure across the U.S. formation reached a breaking point. USS Truxtun had to shift into a reduced sensor mode while damage control teams rushed onto the deck. In the air, the MH-60R crew faced its own crisis. Cockpit warning lights flashed amber as a Tear-2B surface-to-air missile, supported by tracking data from the Cobra 58 network, passed within meters of the Seahawk's fuselage. The pilot reacted instantly, forcing the helicopter into a steep emergency dive while releasing the last of its heat decoys. For the first time since the engagement began, the U.S. Navy was no longer simply controlling the fight. It was trying to hold its picture of the battlefield together, while the IRGC turned the electromagnetic spectrum into a storm of confusion. At 2:55 a.m., just as the IRGC prepared a coordinated sea and air push to exploit Truxtun's vulnerability, the U.S. Navy revealed its own hidden advantage. A high-speed, unmanned boat surged out of the darkness, moving at nearly 50 knots toward the starboard side of USS Mason. With electronic interference still heavy, conventional guns struggled to maintain a clean track. But Mason had another option. The ship brought Helios online, a 60-kilowatt directed energy system developed by Lockheed Martin. An invisible beam of concentrated energy swept across the surface of the water. 3 seconds later, the unmanned craft lost control and erupted in a bright flash. The intense heat disabled its engine section and ignited its fuel before it could reach the destroyer's hull. But the real turning point was only beginning. The captain of USS Mason authorized the use of SOIP Block 3, a next-generation electronic warfare system developed by Northrop Grumman. Unlike traditional jammers, which simply flood the spectrum with noise, SOIP Block 3 launched a cyber-electronic counterstrike. It intercepted the Cobra 58 transmissions and pushed highly convincing false data back into Iran's command and control network. At 2:58 a.m., the deception worked perfectly. On Iranian radar screens, ghost targets suddenly began to appear. Dozens of huge U.S. warship signatures appeared to be charging toward the Iranian coastline. IRGC operators, misled by these digital phantoms, redirected their remaining Cobra 58 assets and third Cordad missiles toward targets that did not exist. While Iran's final defensive efforts were pulled into empty space, SEWIP Block 3 restored clarity to the U.S. Link 16 data stream. With the electronic haze fading and the enemy distracted by false contacts, the destroyers and Seahawk helicopters regained a clean tactical picture. Then came the counterstrike. SM-6 missiles in anti-radiation mode and Hellfire missiles from the Seahawks launched almost simultaneously. They followed the active emissions from the Cobra 58 platforms and the remaining third Cordad batteries with pinpoint accuracy. Within 60 seconds, Iran's jamming network and air defense nodes were systematically disabled. The electronic shield that had covered the IRGC's final naval force broke apart, leaving its units confused, isolated, and exposed in the darkness. While USS Mason used SEWIP to disrupt the enemy's command network, USS McFall launched its final wave of ESSM interceptors against the remaining coastal artillery positions. That cleared a path for the Seahawk helicopters to move closer and finish the operation. The three destroyers continued forward. At 3:05 a.m., the collapse of Iran's electronic screen and the loss of its main third Cordad batteries created a temporary gap in the coastal defense network. Inside USS Mason's CIC, the Aegis combat system fused satellite intelligence with real-time FLIR feeds from the Seahawk helicopters. Then it found something critical, a black corridor. It was a narrow tactical blind spot, roughly 4 miles wide, where damaged radar coverage had left an opening in the IRGC's coastal surveillance grid. This was the only route for a final decisive strike before Iran could move reserve units back into position. But the window was almost impossibly small, less than 12 seconds. At 3:07 a.m., the U.S. formation made its move. SM-6 missiles already descending from high altitude were redirected through Link 16 and guided into the corridor. At the same time, the Seahawk helicopters fired their remaining AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, targeting the IRGC's final command and control sites along the coast. The timing was exact. The SM-6 missiles came down at extreme speed, overwhelming the regional command hub before it could recover. The Hellfires followed moments later, disabling the last Siraj-1 launch points and cutting off the remaining fast craft from organized support. By 3:15 a.m., the IRGC Navy's final defensive force was in complete operational breakdown. The remaining fast boats pulled back into the coastal fog in disorder. Their communications were fractured. Their command structure had been severed. Their electronic cover was gone. USS Mason, USS Truxtun, and USS McFall completed their transit through the Strait of Hormuz with their sensors still functioning and their hulls intact. This was not just a contest of firepower. It was a contest of adaptation. Iran had spent years building a defensive wall meant to control the world's most sensitive maritime passage. But in the middle of the engagement, the U.S. Navy did not simply break through that wall. It rewrote the system protecting it. And that raises the real question: what if the deception had failed? What if SEWIP Block 3 had not been there to cut through the electronic fog? What if a single anti-ship missile had missed its intended target and reached a commercial oil tanker instead? The world could have woken up to a completely different reality. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important arteries of the global economy. One disabled vessel in those narrow waters could trigger shipping insurers to suspend coverage, forcing commercial traffic to halt almost instantly. Oil prices could surge, supply chains could freeze, markets could panic before sunrise, and the risk of a regional crisis spiraling beyond control would become very real. In modern warfare, the distance between a successful patrol and a global economic shock is not always measured in miles. Sometimes it is measured in 60 seconds of precision.